The cold hit her face first. Not wind, but the specific cold of open sky after hours underground, and Zephine almost wept from it. Her palms were shredded. She had known they would be before she started, had looked at the drainage tunnel beneath the iron-holed fence and thought, in the flat, practical way she had developed after 6 years of thinking about nothing but survival, that the corroded metal would take the skin right off. She had been right. The tunnel was 40 feet long and barely wider than her shoulders, and the infant strapped against her chest had made it narrower still. He had not made a sound in 7 minutes. That was the part that kept her moving, past the point where her knees were screaming, past the point where the blood from her palms had gone tacky, and then wet again, past the point where rational thought might have suggested that she stop and reassess. 7 minutes of silence from a 3-month-old meant one of 2 things, and she was not going to let it be the wrong one. His name was Cello. She had named him herself 3 nights ago, when she had realized no one else was going to bother. She pressed 2 fingers to the curve of his throat, feeling for the pulse point just beneath his jaw. It was there, faint and fast, but there, the flutters of something small and determined refusing to stop. She exhaled against the cold ground and kept crawling. Zeph had been an Ironhold Pack's night infirmary aide for 4 years, which was a formal title for a job that involved emptying waste basins, rebandaging wounds that the actual healers had dressed sloppily, and staying awake through the hours when sick wolves were at their most frightened and no one with authority wanted to be present. She had no rank. She had never shifted. At 16, she had stood in the clearing with the rest of her age group and waited while the moon rose and her body did nothing at all. Not a ripple, not a tremble, nothing. They called her stillborn after that, which was crueler than hollow but meant the same thing. Empty, defective, a wolf with no wolf inside. She had learned to be useful anyway. Useful was its own kind of armor. Cello was not her child. His mother had been the Ironhold Alpha's mate, Doria, who had died 6 days after delivery from a hemorrhage that the pack physician might have prevented if he had been present for the birth, instead of attending to the Alpha's preferred lieutenant and a pulled muscle in the man's thigh. Zeph had been the one in the room. She had done everything she could with the supplies she was permitted to access, which were not enough. She had held Doria's hand at the end and had not let go until the hand went cold. And then, 6 weeks later, she had walked into the Alpha's private nursery to change the linens and found Cello alone in the dark, his forehead burning hot enough to feel through the swaddling, a folded note pinned to the blanket in the beta's precise handwriting. Let this resolve on its own. Do not intervene. She stood in that room for a long time. The beta's name was Streth. He had been dismantling every trace of Doria for 6 weeks. Her portrait removed from the main hall, her name struck from the official pack records, her personal effects distributed or destroyed. The official story was grief. The actual story, as Zeph had pieced together from fragments overheard in the infirmary and the supply corridor and the kitchens where no one watched the night aide too closely, was power. A living heir complicated Streth's position in ways that were inconvenient. A dead infant, grieved quietly, fixed the problem. Cello's father, the Alpha Gareth, had retreated into himself so completely in the weeks after Doria's death that he had stopped attending council meetings. The beta had been running the pack in everything but name. No one was coming. Zeph had looked at the note in Streth's handwriting for a long moment. Then she had taken off her outer shirt, fashioned it into a sling, tucked Cello against her heartbeat, and walked out. She had not had a plan beyond the Thornwall pack as a healer. Thornwall's territory began 4 miles east, across the drainage flats and the iron fence, and 2 miles of black pine forest that the 2 packs had been disputing for 30 years. Their healer was a woman named Pell, who had a reputation that reached across 3 territories. The kind of reputation that grew from results rather than storytelling, because Pell reportedly had no patience for anything that wasn't evidence-based medicine delivered without sentiment. She had saved pups that 3 other healers had given up on, If Zeph could reach Pell before Cello's fever finished what Streth had uttered, then maybe. The ground on the Thornwall side rose in a long, gentle slope. Her left ankle had hit the edge of the tunnel's drainage grate coming through, and the pain had been immediate and specific, the kind that meant structural damage rather than bruising. She was walking on it anyway, because the alternative was not walking on it, and that was not an option she was willing to consider. The forest was different here. Ironhold's woods smelled like iron ore and wet clay. Thornwalls smelled like cedar resin and something mineral beneath, stone and cold water and an electricity in the air that made the hair on her arms stand up even through the fabric of her remaining shirt. Like the moment before lightning found ground, she did not know much about the Thornwall Alpha. His name was Aldous Verne, and he had held the territory for 28 years without taking a mate, which the Ironhold wolves mentioned the way they mentioned things that unnerved them, briefly, and then not again. They called him the Warden. They said his wolf was grey-black and massive, the kind of wolf that made other wolves instinctively lower their heads. They said he had excellent intelligence on every territory within 300 miles, and that he had used it with surgical precision for 3 decades. None of that was her concern right now. Her concern was a border patrol station and a healer's name. The trees opened, a clearing, lamplight in a stone building's window, a wooden post with the Thornwall sigil, a warden's mark, the silhouette of a wolf mid-stride inside a geometric border carved into timber that facing east. Cello made a sound, a thin, reedy pull of breath, not a cry, something that a cry might become if he had the strength for it. "I know," she said. Her voice had gone to gravel somewhere in the tunnel. "I hear you. Hold on." She could feel her ankle swelling inside her boot. Each step was a specific, escalating argument between pain and forward motion was winning only because she refused to let it lose. She reached the station door and knocked. The sound was barely audible. She knocked again. The door opened. The wolf in the frame was not large in the way that intimidated. He was large in the way that suggested function, a man built for work with a broad chest and a border patrol uniform that fit him like it had been worn for years. He had a short beard and calm eyes, and he looked at her with the expression of a man cataloguing an unexpected situation before responding to it. "What?" He stopped. His nostrils moved. His eyes dropped to the shape against her chest. "What happened to you?" It was not quite a question. "He needs a healer." The words came out in wrong order, which was not how she had planned to say them, but her brain had been running on crisis for 4 hours, and planning was something that happened in a different life. He's 3 months old, he has a fever, and he's the Ironhold heir, and they were letting him die. Please, I just need to get him to Pell. I'll go back after. I'll surrender. I'll let you restrain me. Just please get him to your healer first." The border wolf stared at her. Behind him she could see 2 others at a table, a card game abandoned when the door opened, both of them completely still in the way wolves go still when something registers as significant, and the body is waiting for the brain to catch up. "You came through the drainage cut," the wolf said. Not a question either. He could see the rust stains on her forearms, the way her shirt hung in strips at the sleeves, the particular pallor of someone who had been operating on empty for longer than her body was designed to sustain. Yes, with a 3-month-old. Yes, and a broken ankle. She had not said that. It's not broken. It might be broken. It doesn't matter. Something moved in his face. Not pity, something more considered than pity. "Get inside," he said, and stepped back from the door. The warmth of the fire reached her 3 steps before she crossed the threshold, and it hit her the way arriving somewhere hits you when you did not know until that moment how far you had been from anywhere safe. Her knees buckled. The wolf, his name was Harvin, she learned later, caught her with one arm, an automatic steadying grip, careful in the way that large men are careful with things they understand to be fragile. "Easy," he said. Cello cried. A real cry this time, not the thin breath from before. A full-bodied infant howl that said, "I am alive and I am furious, and someone should be attending to this situation." She pulled the sling open, and in the firelight his face was flushed and burning, and his tiny hands were clenched at the sides of his head. But he was crying, and crying meant air, and air meant he was still here. "He's febrile," Harvin said, pressing 2 fingers to Sello's forehead and then pulling them back fast. "Tavish, radio the main house. Tell them we need Pell at the Eastern Station now." "It's past midnight. I know what time it is. Tell them now." One of the other wolves moved to the communication equipment. The third one, younger, brought Zeph a cup of water without being asked. She drank it in one motion and held it out. He refilled it. "What's your name?" Harvin said. He had taken Sello carefully from her, tucking the infant against his chest with the unconscious ease of someone who had held small things before and understood the responsibility of it. The pup's cry had dropped to a ragged, exhausted panting, but his eyes were open and they were tracking. "Zeph, I'm nobody. I was the night infirmary aide at Ironhold. You came through a corrosion tunnel in the dark with a broken ankle and a sick infant. I said it might be broken." Harvin looked at her with an expression she did not immediately recognize because she had not encountered it often enough to have it catalogued. It was respect, the specific kind that does not require context or history, that responds to evidence directly. "That's not nobody," the radio crackled. A voice responded. Harvin's second wolf relayed the situation. The response came back in clipped, efficient sentences. "Pell is on her way. 20 minutes out." A pause. But the Alpha heard the emergency call. He was already in the eastern sector. 5 minutes. Harvin went completely still. The young wolf with the water cup looked at Zeph. Something in his expression suggested he was trying to decide whether to prepare her for something or let her figure it out on her own. "The Warden is coming here," he said. The fire was warm. Sello was in Harvin's arms. Her ankle was becoming an increasingly insistent presence in her awareness. Zeph thought about Aldous Verne of Thornwall, 28 years of holding territory, the wolves who used his name the way they mentioned things that made them careful. She looked at Sello. "Just let him live," she thought, "that's all. Just let him live and I don't care about the rest." Harvin glanced at her. "Nothing is going to happen to you," he said. She understood that he meant it kindly. She also understood that he could not know that. She had spent 4 years in Ironhold being told that things would be fine by people who had the authority to make things fine and chose not to. Kind words were not the same as actions, and the action she was watching, a border patrol wolf rocking an enemy pup in the middle of the night with complete calm, that she trusted. The door opened without a knock. Cold entered first. Not the cold of outdoors, but something older, something that came with the arrival of something that occupied significant space in the world. The fire dipped. The flames pulled inward by a degree, as though preferring not to draw attention to themselves. He filled the doorway, not in a way that was about height, though he was well over 6 feet. Not in a way that was about width, though his shoulders cleared the frame with nothing to spare. He filled it in the way that certain presences fill a space, not through physical dimension, but through the absolute certainty of what he was. The room reorganized itself around his arrival. Gravity had an opinion about where the center was. Aldous Verne stepped inside. He was not the monster of the cautionary stories. Or he was, but the monstrous aspect was not what Zeph had expected, not brutality worn on the surface, but something more controlled. Something that had been enormous and wild and had been lived with long enough that it wore a very precise exterior, the way a man who has spent 30 years commanding his own nature develops a specific kind of stillness. His jaw was angular, severe. A scar began at the left corner of his mouth and curved toward his jaw, old and pale. His eyes were grey, the particular grey of charcoal, and they were not looking at Harvin or Sello or the fire. They were looking at her. He stopped moving, stopped completely, mid-step, in a way that should have been physically awkward, and instead seemed like something a river does, when it encounters something it has not been built to accommodate. His nostrils flared, his hands hanging loose at his sides went very still. Then his jaw set, a visible effort, the clench of a man who has just been given information he need timed to process. "Mine," he said. The word came from somewhere beneath his speaking voice, from the part of him that was not working through the social niceties of the situation. It was not loud. It was the kind of sound that did not need to be loud. Zeph stared at him. "Mate." His voice was barely even, held in check by something that required visible effort to maintain. "You are my mate." "That's not possible," she said. "I don't have a wolf." He crossed half the distance between them in 2 steps, then stopped, because she had moved. Not backward, she had just shifted her weight, an involuntary adjustment, the body's automatic response to something moving fast toward it. He went rigid. She watched it happen, the full body halt, the way he stood there, all of him suspended, looking at her the way you look at a wound you have just been told about and are only now seeing for the first time. "You flinched," he said. He said it as a fact, the way you note something that needs to be addressed, that you will be returning to. "I barely moved," she said. "Who?" he said, and the word was a different texture than the rest. Rougher, the human casing of something underneath. "Made you move like that?" She did not answer. She was looking at his hands. They were large, crossed with old scars on the knuckles and the backs, and they were not still. They were shaking. The Warden of Thornwall, the man who had held 300 miles of territory for 28 years, and who did not take a mate and who made other alphas speak carefully, was trembling because she had shifted her weight. "The infant?" she said, because Cello was the only reason she had come. "He has a fever. He hasn't been fed properly for days. He's Gareth of Ironhold's son, the legitimate heir, and the beta was starving him. Please, your healer." Aldous turned his head. It appeared to cost him something physical, the act of taking his eyes off her. He looked at Haven. "Give me the child." Haven transferred Cello without hesitation. The alpha took the infant in hands that were, despite the shaking, extraordinarily careful, the kind of careful that comes from wanting very much not to cause harm. He turned back the makeshift sling, looked at the pup's face, pressed one thumb against the small sternum. "Breathing is shallow," he said. "Pell, 20 minutes, Haven said. 12, tell her 12. He looked at Tavish, who moved to the radio. Then he looked back at Zeph. She watched him look at her. She had a sense of what he was seeing. The state of her, the rust and blood and shredded palms and the shirt that had been through a drainage tunnel, the ankle that was now visibly swollen above the boot line, the sharpness of her collarbones visible at her torn collar. The kind of sharpness that means months, not days. She had been shorted on rations for 8 months, since Streth had taken over the administrative functions of the pack, and had decided that a night aid with no wolf did not require full portions. She had learned to compensate. Her body had compensated in the only way available to it. Something changed in his face. She watched it happen. His eyes went dark, the grey eaten from the outside in, and his canines. She could see them, longer than they should have been, just slightly. The wolf distorting the human face showed at the edge of his closed mouth. "Who is responsible?" he said, and it was not a question this time. "It doesn't matter. I am going to disagree with you. Cello matters. That's why I'm here. That's the only reason I came through that tunnel. Not for me. If you can save him, I'll surrender. I'll go back to Ironhold and face whatever." "Stop." She stopped. "You are not going back to Ironhold," he said. "You don't get to decide that." The silence in the station was the silence of a room full of people who have stopped breathing because they cannot tell yet which direction the thing they are watching is going to fall. Aldous looked at her. Something moved through his face in sequence, a calculation, then a correction, then something else, something that was not about calculation at all. "You're right," he said. "I don't." A pause, exactly 2 seconds. "I'm asking." Something shifted in her chest. She had been hollow there for so long. She had been told for so long that the hollow was just who she was, a defect, a stillborn wolf who never became anything, that she had stopped expecting anything to register in that space. But something had been registering all along, since the moment he walked through the door, and now it moved like a thing that had been dormant and was considering whether to make itself known. She put her hand against her sternum, confused by the pressure of it. He knelt. Aldous Verne, the Warden, the man who had not taken a mate in 28 years, and whose name was used in other packs the way you use the name of something that demands respect, went to his knees on the floor of the Border Patrol station. Harvin made a sound he immediately suppressed. Aldous ignored him. He was at her eye level now, and close, and she could smell him. Not what she had expected from something that occupied that much space in the world. Pine sap and cold stone and iron at the surface, but under it, warmth, safety, the specific warmth of a place you do not have to explain yourself, a word she had stopped using because it had stopped applying to anywhere she had been in a long time. "I have been looking," he said, "for 28 years. His voice had changed, still controlled, but controlled differently, the way a thing is controlled when the effort of controlling it is visible. "My wolf has been, I don't have a good word for it, destroying me from inside. Counselors told me my mate was dead. I had stopped believing that, but I didn't know what else to believe instead." He stopped. "And you are here." A pause. His jaw worked. "In my border station, bleeding through borrowed cloth, holding another man's infant. And you are." He stopped again. "I'm not what you think," Zeph said. "I'm wolfless. I've been wolfless for 12 years. I'm a nobody's anything. You came through a corroded drainage tunnel in the dark with a broken ankle and a dying infant because no one else was going to do it." His hand came up slowly. He held it open near her face, not touching, not presuming, asking. "That is not nobody's anything." She leaned into his palm. She did not decide to. Her body decided without consulting her, the way the body sometimes makes the correct choice faster than the mind, the way a plant moves toward light without negotiating. The warmth of his hand against her face was the warmth of the fire, but different. Interior, the kind that comes from inside outward instead of outside in. The sound she made was involuntary, small, something between relief and the specific grief that comes from being okay after a long time of not being okay, and not realizing, until the okay arrived, how long you had been waiting for it. His thumb moved against her cheekbone, careful, as if he was afraid of breaking something. Cello made a sound. She pulled back. He stood, and the alpha was in his face again, the Warden, the arranged exterior, the man who was accustomed to being in charge of things. "Harvin, take them both to the main house, my rooms. Fire, food, water, clean cloth, all of it before Pell arrives. Nobody enters those rooms except Pell. Nobody speaks to her in any tone I would not use personally. If that's unclear, ask me to clarify and I will." Harvin said your rooms, Warden, in a voice that was doing considerable work to remain professional. "Did I say something ambiguous? No, Warden?" "Good." He looked at Zeph. "Can you walk? I've been walking." A beat. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "Yes," he said. "You have." He picked her up. She expected the automatic bracing that preceded roughness, because that was the physical reflex she had developed over years of learning what to expect when people moved fast toward her. It did not come, because what followed was not rough. He lifted her, the way you lift something you have been waiting a long time to be allowed to carry. One arm beneath her knees, one at her back, Cello still held against his chest in the curve of his opposite arm. The warmth of him was everywhere, cedar and cold stone, and something underneath that she had no name for, something her body understood before she did. The hollow place in her chest was doing something unfamiliar, pressing, moving. "What is that?" she said. "What do you feel?" "I don't know." "Something. Here." She pressed her own hand against her sternum. He looked at her for a moment. "Your wolf," he said. "I don't have a wolf. You do." His jaw set. "She's been suppressed. We'll find out why." They moved through the forest. He walked as though she and Cello together were no more weight than a coat, and the path through the pines seemed to widen slightly in front of him. Not literally, but in the way that things clear for something that has sufficient gravity. The Thornwall main house was nothing like Ironhold's pack house, which was concrete and bleach, and the particular ugliness of a building designed for function rather than life. This was stone and dark timber and smoke from multiple chimneys and the warm amber glow of lit windows in the pre-dawn dark. The front entrance was carved, wolves running in a forest, rendered in detail by someone who had cared about getting it right. And the doors opened before Aldous reached them, 2 guards pulling them wide without a word. Inside, beeswax and burning wood and, faintly, bread. Stone floors under thick rugs in the colors of forest and earth, a staircase curving upward into fire-lit dark. Pell. Aldous said the name once, and a door opened on the upper landing. The healer was not what Zeph had pictured. She had pictured someone younger, or at least someone who looked like the reputation. Formidable, precise, a little frightening. Pell was in her 60s. She was compact and grey-haired, and wearing glasses pushed up on her forehead and carrying what appeared to be a half-eaten piece of bread she had not been willing to put down entirely. She looked at the situation from the landing with the expression of a woman who has been doing difficult work for a long time and is not alarmed by difficulty, only by inefficiency. "You woke me," she said, and then she looked at Sello and then at Zeph, and did a rapid professional assessment that took approximately 3 seconds. "Bring them both. Healing room. Now." The next hour was warm water and capable hands, and Pell's voice, which was brisk and no-nonsense in the specific way that good healers' voices are brisk and no-nonsense. Not because they are cold, but because they have learned that in the moments when it counts, efficiency is its own form of care. Zeph insisted on Sello first, and Pell agreed without argument, and Zeph watched from a cot as the healer unwrapped the infant and worked, her hands moving with the economy of long practice. Dehydration, malnutrition, fever from an ear infection untreated, progressed. Pell looked up at Aldous, who was in the doorway. "This infant has been deliberately neglected. This is not administrative failure. Someone chose this." The sound Aldous made was subterranean, the kind of sound that comes from a chest rather than a throat. "He'll survive." With intervention? Yes. Without it, you were looking at 48 hours. Pell had already moved to her instruments, a line placed with precise efficiency, something in a small syringe that made Sello scream with the unambiguous fury of an infant who had not lost his opinions. Antibiotics. Nutrients. Give it 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, Sello was drinking from a formula bottle that Pell had prepared with the focus of someone who took feeding protocols seriously, and his color was coming back, the grayish cast fading toward the particular pink of an infant who is returning to himself. Zeph cried. She had not cried in years. She had not cried when her status was stripped from her at 16, had not cried when her rations were cut, had not cried through any of the small and medium and occasionally large cruelties of the last 4 years, because crying was the kind of thing you did when you believed that someone would respond to it, and she had stopped believing that. But watching Sello's tiny hands find the bottle and grip it and hold on, watching his eyes focus and his breathing steady, she cried, silently. The tears just came out, rolling down her face, and she let them because her hands were shaking too badly to wipe them anyway. Aldous sat down on the edge of the cot next to her. He did not touch her. He just was there, a wall of warmth and cedar, and a fury she could feel without it being directed at her, the specific heat of someone who is angry on behalf of another person and is managing it carefully, and when she leaned sideways and her shoulder touched his arm, he went completely still and let her. "Thank you," she said. "You did this," he said. "I provided the geography. You have the healer. You had the courage to reach her." Pell finished with Sello and settled him into a proper bassinet with warming elements and a monitor, and then turned to Zeph with the expression of a professional who has finished the first emergency and is now addressing the second. "Shirt," she said. "I'm fine. You have a broken ankle. Abrasions over 60% of your forearms, palms that need to be debrided, and from the look of your collar, something structural going on with your shoulders. You are not fine. Remove the shirt. I can handle the shirt," Aldous said quietly. "I will step outside." He did. Pell waited until the door closed. Zeph removed the shirt. Pell said nothing for a long moment. Then she put her instruments down. She put her glasses on. She walked behind Zeph, and Zeph heard her stop, and then there was a long silence that had a specific quality to it. "Aldous," Pell said. Her voice was different. The efficiency was still there, but it was carrying something else. "Come in here." He was back in the room. Zeph heard him stop behind her. "What?" she said. "What is it? I've had those since I was small. I always thought they were from a fever I had as a child." "They are not from a fever," Pell said. "These are binding marks, suppression sigils, carved into the skin. Old practice, blood magic. This is why you haven't shifted. Someone sealed your wolf when you were very young." The word sealed landed in a specific way. Zeph felt the world do a slow tilt, the way it does when information arrives that requires reorganizing every preceding assumption. "Who would do that?" she said. Aldous spoke. His voice was barely within the range of what could be called controlled. "Someone who knew what you were and wanted to make sure you never found out what I am. I'm wolfless. You are not wolfless." Pell had crossed to the bookshelf and was pulling a volume with a cloth cover from the back row. She opened it to a page, held it up. The illustration was old, a diagram of a pattern. Zeph recognized the shape without wanting to recognize it, because it was the pattern on her own back, the one she had tried to see with 2 mirrors and never entirely succeeded. This sigil is specific. It was designed for a specific purpose, to suppress what the old texts call a tide-born bloodline. Zeph's hands had gone still in her lap. "A tide-born wolf," Pell said, looking at her over the glasses, a bloodline that was believed extinct for at least 2 generations. They were known for specific attributes. The ability to hear falsehood, the ability to bring a wolf back from feral, which is considered impossible. The ability to— She paused, looked at Aldous. "To what?" Zeph said. Pell closed the book. "To stabilize a bloodline under extreme internal pressure, to calm a wolf that is tearing itself apart from the inside." She looked at Aldous. "The Warden's bloodline is—" "I know what my bloodline is," Aldous said. "Then you understand what she is to you beyond the bond?" "Yes." A pause. "And I want to be clear that it is irrelevant." Zeph looked at him. "Relevant to what?" His eyes met hers. "I don't want you because you are useful to me." The words were direct, without softness, without decoration. "I have wanted you since I walked through that door, and you looked at me like I was a problem to be managed, and told me I didn't get to decide your fate. That had nothing to do with bloodlines. A beat. The tide-born lineage is a fact. It is not a reason." She was looking for the barb. 12 years of learning that kindness in Ironhold came with a hook. That generosity had architecture she needed to understand before she trusted the surface of it. She mapped his face, his voice, the way he held himself, and the way his hands were still not quite steady when he looked at her. She could not find the barb. "How long?" she said. "Until we can remove the marks." Pell looked between them. "I want her at full strength first. Her iron is dangerously low. Her bone density suggests extended malnutrition, 2 weeks minimum before I'll consider it." "And after that," Zeph said. Pell was quiet for a moment. "After that, there will be pain. The sigils are layered. Each layer binds a different part of the wolf. When each one breaks, the wolf pushes through. There are 6. She paused. "When the last one breaks, your wolf comes all the way through. And I want you to understand that a tide-born wolf that has been sealed for 12 years is going to be— She will be angry. She will be strong. I want you prepared for what that looks like." She slept that night in a real bed for the first time in 4 years. She had been sleeping on a cot in the infirmary supply closet at Ironhold, which had been fine, in the sense that she had a roof and blankets and had made herself stop caring about the alternative. The bed in Aldos's rooms was a real bed, actual mattress, sheets that had been washed with something that smelled like cedar, a quilt heavy enough to feel like being held. She pulled it over her face and lay there for a moment in the dark, listening to Cello's breathing from the bassinet across the room, and thought, "He is alive and I am here, and tomorrow is still a problem, but right now both of those things are true." She slept. She woke to Cello, fussing with the specific imperiousness of an infant who has remembered that he has opinions. Aldous was already at the warming element, heating a prepared bottle. He tested the temperature on his wrist. He had not changed, was still in the same clothes, and she understood somehow that he had not left, had been in the chair by the door through the night. "You stayed," she said. "You didn't sleep." "No." She crossed to the bassinet. Her ankle was splinted now, Pell's work from the night before, and walking was an argument she was winning through stubbornness. She reached Cello and lifted him, and the pup's anger dissolved into the concentrated focus of an infant given access to a bottle. "Ironhold knows the child is gone," Aldous said. He was watching her feed Cello from across the room, his arms crossed, maintaining the distance he had been maintaining deliberately since the previous night. "Streth has filed a formal demand for the heir's return. He has also filed a complaint characterizing you as a rogue operative who abducted the infant under false pretenses." She did not look up. "He has requested your extradition." Cello's hands found her fingers closed around them. "I told him no," Aldous said. She looked up. "I told him no to everything. The infant stays. You stay. If Ironhold wants to discuss the situation, Gareth can send a formal delegation, and that delegation can explain to me directly why a 3-month-old heir was found in a supply crate with a documented order to withhold feeding." A pause. "I would enjoy that conversation. They'll say I fabricated the note. They can say that to my face. I have been waiting for a reason to address Ironhold's territorial conduct for 11 years. I am going to enjoy this." There was no heat in his voice. There did not need to be. The days organized themselves differently here. Pell supervised her eating with the stern efficiency of someone who understood that a body needed rebuilding the same way a structure does, foundation first. She ate 5 times a day, all of it calibrated. She slept. She carried Cello, who had decided within 72 hours that she was the correct surface for everything, and who cried when put down and settled the moment she picked him up with the absolute confidence of an infant who has identified his person and will not be argued with. She did not want to love him. She understood the logic of not loving him. Cello belonged to Gareth, to Ironhold, to a future that was complicated and not hers to claim. Loving a child you were not going to keep was a particular kind of damage she could avoid if she was careful. She was not careful enough. He learned her heartbeat. He slept against her chest like it was the only rhythm that made sense. He grabbed her hair with a grip that was comically strong for something that weighed 9 pounds, and he looked up at her with eyes that were still sorting themselves into their permanent color. Grey-green, Doria's eyes, wide and trusting in a way that made her chest hurt. She loved him. She knew exactly when it happened, and she could not stop it. Aldous kept his distance. He was always present, always within range, always positioned, so that she had him in her peripheral vision without feeling surrounded. But he did not touch her again after that first night, not since his palm against her cheek, and she began to understand that this was deliberate. He was watching her flinch at sudden movements. He was learning the architecture of what had been done to her, and he was refusing to add his name to the list of things that moved fast toward her without asking permission first. It made her angrier than she expected, and then she understood that the anger was something else. It was her body knowing what it wanted, and being frustrated by the patience of a man who was also deciding to give her time to reach for it herself. On the 6th day, the delegation from Ironhold arrived. Zeph watched them come through the main gate from a window in the upper hall. She knew the face at the front, Streth, Beta, and Acting Alpha, in formal pack authority dress that he had not been entitled to wear before Gareth's withdrawal from leadership. Behind him, 2 senior council wolves, and, in the back, a figure she had not expected. Old, moving slowly with the posture of someone who carries old decisions in their spine. Elder Sen. She had been the one to watch Zeph stand in the clearing at 16. She had been the first to say stillborn. She had also, Zeph remembered now, argued in council against the cut to the infirmary aides' rations, The single time she had heard Sen push back against Streth, and the push had not held. Aldous met them in the great hall. Zeph was not invited. Old habits are more reliable than formal instructions, and she found a servant's corridor that ran behind the balcony overhead, and she settled there with Cello warm and oblivious against her chest, and watched through the carved lattice. The great hall was built the way powerful things are built, not to intimidate through ostentation, but through scale. 40-foot ceilings, stone columns carved with sentinel wolves, detailed, patient work, a chair on a raised platform at the far end, and Aldous sitting in it with the particular stillness of something that does not have to demonstrate what it is. Streth spoke first. His voice was smooth, calibrated, the voice of a man who has rehearsed this. "Warden, we come in good faith seeking the return of Ironhold's heir and a former pack member who has suffered a break from reality and poses a danger to herself and the child she has taken." Aldous said nothing. He let the silence run. 5 seconds, 10-20. Streth's left hand moved, just a twitch. "The child described," Aldous said eventually, his tone conversational in the specific way that people who do not need to raise their voices make their voices carry, was found with an acute ear infection left untreated until it became systemic, febrile at 104 degrees, malnourished, dehydrated, and housed in supply appropriate for an infant of any status. He paused. "In your pack's nursery. My healer's assessment indicates he had 48 hours without intervention. The infant was receiving care. There were complications following the Luna's death. Staffing transitions. He fell through gaps in the system. Staffing transitions." Aldous let the phrase sit in the silence until it became what it was. An interesting way to describe a documented order to withhold feeding from a 3-month-old. He tilted his head. "A degree. Would you like to tell me about that note specifically, or would you prefer I bring my documentation and we do this in more detail?" Streth's smooth surface cracked. Not visibly, he was good, but Zeph could see it from the lattice. "The aide has fabricated." "The aide," Aldous said, and the temperature in the room dropped. "Whose name is Zephine? Is my mate. I would be grateful if you adjusted your phrasing." The silence was a living thing. Streth recovered faster than she expected. "Warden, with respect, the girl is wolfless, a stillborn. The bond you're describing is biologically. You were explaining Thornwall bond mechanics to me." Aldous stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, giving everyone in the room time to understand what was happening. "In my own hall." He descended from the platform 1 step. Thank you for that." Elder Sen had not spoken. She was looking at the lattice screen on the 2nd floor. She knew. She had known since she walked in, or before. "Here is what is going to happen," Aldous said. "The infant Cello remains under Thornwall formal protection. Zephine remains here. If the Alpha of Ironhold wishes to discuss custody of his heir, he can come himself, assuming he is still functioning in that capacity and not simply providing Streth's position with a face." Streth's expression went white at the edges. "What I would like to discuss with you now, Beta, is who made the decision to allow a 3-month-old to die slowly in a storage crate, and why the only person who intervened was the one you are calling a danger to herself." He stopped. The distance between him and Streth was 8 feet, and it felt like 4 inches. "Those are not rhetorical questions. I expect answers, but not today. Today, Harvin will see you to the border." Streth opened his mouth. Aldous waited. Streth did not speak, then moved for the first time. She walked to the center of the hall floor, slowly, and looked up at the lattice screen. "She is there," Sen said, not all to the lattice. "I know you can hear me, girl." Zeph held Cello tighter. "Her wolf was bound," Sen said, her voice carrying in the stone hall with the particular resonance of old things. "Not by me. By someone before my time, someone who recognized what she was, and did not want what she was to surface in a place that would bring the old authorities down on us." She paused. "I inherited the decision when I took Sen's position. I did not undo it. I told myself it was protection. I have had a long time to understand that what I told myself was a justification." Aldous looked at the old woman. "You knew what she was. I knew she was something we weren't equipped to handle. Sen's jaw set. The Tideborn bloodline was believed to draw old enmities, powers that had been sleeping. I was not wrong about that. She paused. I was wrong about the choice. You watched a child stand in a clearing and be called stillborn because of a decision you inherited and maintained. Sen did not answer that directly. Her eyes were still on the lattice. When the binding breaks, she said, and it will break, and she should let it. The pain comes in layers, one for each seal. Do not fight the wolf. She has been patient for 12 years. She has earned the right to come through. Then she turned and walked out. Streth followed, saying something about formal protests. Aldous looked at Harvin. Harvin understood. They left. Zeph found Aldous in the great hall after, standing at the foot of the platform stairs, his head bowed, his hands braced on the carved railing. The posture was the posture of a man who has been managing something enormous for a long time and has had a moment where he did not have to manage it in front of anyone. He heard her before she spoke. He always heard her. I heard everything, she said. I know. I'm not a Tideborn. Whatever that old woman thinks she knows. The mark on your wrist, he said, and turned. She looked at her left wrist. The small mark there, the one she'd had since childhood, shaped like a crescent moon laid on its side, like a scar from something specific. I always thought that was from the fever, she said. Did you? He crossed the hall toward her, not fast, never fast. Your wolf has been sealed since you were very small, Zeph, by someone who knew what you were and chose to make sure you never became it. Pell can break the seals. She already has the methodology. The only question is when, and after that you are exactly who you are now, he said. With more of yourself available, you make it sound simple. It is simple. You are my mate. You are brave and infuriating, and you walked into enemy territory with a broken ankle, because no one else was going to do it. The bloodline is a fact. It is not the point. She had been looking for his barb for 6 days. She had turned every kindness over, looking for the angle, the hook beneath. There was nothing. There was just a man who had waited a long time standing in his own great hall and meaning what he said. Why haven't you touched me, she said, since the first night? He went still. You haven't, she said. Your hand on my face. That was 6 days ago. Yes. Why? Because you flinch. He looked at her steadily, and I will not be something you endure. When you reach for me, I will be there. I am not going to take what isn't being offered. She stood in the doorway of the Thornwall Great Hall with another man's infant against her chest and binding marks on her back, and a wolf sealed inside her that had been waiting 12 years, and she looked at the most capable, most controlled man she had ever encountered, and she reached out her hand. He took it. His fingers closed around hers, and the thing in her chest that had been pressing at the walls of its cage ignited, not painfully. With a rightness so total it almost undid her, the specific rightness of a joint sliding back into its socket after a long dislocation. His breath caught. She heard it. There, she said, I'm reaching. He pulled her in. Not sudden. Inevitable. His arms came around her, careful of her shoulders, careful of the infant between them, and she felt for the first time in 12 years the particular sensation of something structural settling into place. I'm going to let Pell remove the binding, she said into his chest. When you're ready. I'm ready. Tomorrow. That's not ready. That's careful. Yes. A pause. Something in his voice shifted, the controlled surface allowing a fraction through. I'm being careful with you. You'll have to permit me that. Tomorrow came with Pell and a leather case of instruments and an expression that suggested she had been up most of the night reviewing the methodology and was not going to entertain objections. There are 6 seals, Pell said, setting out her instruments with precision. Each one breaks differently. The first will feel like something internal, not external, not the scar on your skin, but something deeper. Each subsequent seal releases more of the wolf. By the 6th, she will come through. A pause. Do not fight her. You said that before. I will keep saying it until I believe you've understood it. Aldous was in the room. He had positioned himself in the chair nearest the cot, close enough to reach. Pell began. The first seal broke like something releasing pressure. Not glass, more like a seal on a jar. A structural click that happened behind her ribs rather than in her back where the physical marks were, and the pain was specific, a bright, cold wire drawn through her spine, but targeted, purposeful. She gripped the edge of the cot. She did not make a sound. She had learned not to make sounds. "Breathe," Pell said. Second seal. Third. Fourth. Each one released more of the wolf, and the wolf was not gentle. She was the accumulated fury of 12 years of being sealed, 12 years of a body that didn't work right, 12 years of standing in clearings and having nothing happen. She pushed against the interior walls with everything she had. The fifth seal broke, and Zeph did make a sound. It tore out of her involuntarily, not a scream and not a scream, and the single window in the healing room cracked at one corner, fine lines spreading through the glass like frost. Aldous was on his feet. Pell held up one hand without looking at him. "Sit," she said. She's exactly where she's supposed to be." "Sit down." He sat. His knuckles were white. "Last one," Pell said, her voice steady, orienting. "This is the primary seal. The one that was placed first, which means it goes last. When this breaks, the wolf comes through. Let her." The sixth seal broke. The world came apart and reassembled. It was not painful. It was the opposite of pain. It was correction, the long-sought settling of something that had been slightly wrong for so long that the body had forgotten what right felt like, and then it remembered. And the remembering was enormous. Her spine extended. Her hands changed. Her senses detonated outward into a world that suddenly had depth and texture she had never accessed. The cedar and cold stone of Aldous, the iron of Pell's instruments, the beeswax on the walls, the deer 3 miles east, the snow on the peaks above the forest. She landed on 4 paws. The cot was below her, empty, a rumpled concavity. The room was small. She was not. She turned her head toward the cracked window. In the reflected glass, fragmented and overlapping, she saw herself. Large. Much larger than any Omega wolf, larger than a standard alpha female, larger than the framework she had been given for understanding what she might become if she had been allowed to become anything. Her coat was the color of dark water, not black, not gray, the specific deep blue-gray of the ocean in the hour before dawn. Her eyes, in the reflection, were the amber green of shallow seawater over rock. Pell had backed to the wall, not from fear. "Moon preserve us," she said quietly. "A true tide-born wolf." Aldous stood slowly. The wolf turned to look at him. He looked back at her. Something passed between them that had no language. Not human language, not even the language of wolves exactly, but something that the bond between mates is made of when both halves of it are finally present and fully open. The hum that had been there from the beginning became something structural, something load-bearing, something built into the architecture of who she was from that moment forward. The wolf walked to him. She pressed her head against his chest. Not gently. She was not a gentle size, but with controlled force, the way you lean into something you trust to hold your weight. His hands went into her coat and held on. She shifted back, natural fluid, as if she had been doing it her whole life, which in a sense she had been born knowing how to do this and had simply been prevented from it. She was kneeling on the stone floor, and her back was smooth, the marks were gone. Aldous pulled his outer shirt over his head and wrapped it around her. She pulled it close. It smelled like cedar and cold stone and him. "A tide-born wolf," Pell said. She'd sat down in the chair, which was the most uncharacteristic thing Zeph had ever seen her do. The ability to bring a feral wolf back. The ability to sense deception. The ability to... She looked at Aldous. "I know," he said. Zeph looked between them. "His bloodline," she said. "What does it do to his bloodline?" Aldous was quiet for a moment. "My wolf," he said, "has been imprecise, difficult to manage at certain thresholds. For a long time he did not elaborate. He did not need to. And you thought this is why you wanted me," she said. "Because I'm useful." The look he gave her was the sharpest thing he had directed at her yet. Not anger at her, but something quick and unambiguous. I wanted you when I thought you were a wolfless infirmary aide with rust in your hair and a broken ankle and someone else's baby. I wanted you when you told me in my own border station that I didn't get to decide your fate." He paused. "What you are is a fact. It is not the reason." She believed him, not because the words were elaborate, they were not, but because the bond was fully open now, completely clear, and she could feel through it, and what was there was not calculation. Just want, just certainty, just a man who had been waiting 28 years and would wait 28 more if she asked. She did not ask. 3 days later, Ironhold made its move, not a delegation this time. Zeph woke at 2 in the morning to howling, and the pitch was wrong, high, frantic, the sound of wolves being run rather than running of their own accord. Aldous was already moving, already the Warden already composed. The thing she had learned was that he kept the man and the alpha in different compartments and could move between them very fast. Stay here. Lock the servant entrance as well. Keep Cello close. What is it? Ironhold wolves on our eastern flank. 40 or more. He was already at the door, small for a real offensive, which means it's meant to draw attention away from something else. He was gone. She locked both doors. Cello was awake and fussing, reading the tension in the air with the accuracy of an infant who had spent 3 months in a situation that had required him to be alert. She held him and paced. Her wolf paced inside her, restless, all her new senses stretched to their limit. She heard the fighting. Stone walls did not fully contain the sounds of a border conflict. The crack and snarl of wolves in their larger forms, the thud of weight against the ground, the sharp percussive sounds of a skirmish being conducted with purpose. 20 minutes. Then silence. The servant entrance opened. She had locked it. She was certain she had locked it. The woman who stood in the frame was wearing dark combat gear and had the focused expression of someone who had thought through this moment in advance. She was lean and composed, and the eyes were familiar, the same eyes that had looked at Zeph across kitchen hallways and supply corridors in Ironhold, with the particular contempt of someone who had decided another person was less than a person. "Put the child down," she said, "and we can be reasonable about this." Zeph did not put the child down. "You've never been a fighter," the woman said. Her name was Dorna, and she was Streth's second, and she was correct that Zeph had never been a fighter. "Your wolf is new and untrained. You don't know what you're doing with it yet. Hand me the heir and I'll let you live. Streth just needs the body, for documentation purposes. The child doesn't need to be alive for what he needs." Zeph felt something clarify inside her. Not settle, the wrong word, because what it did was the opposite of settling. It sharpened. Her and the wolf together, unified in the way she had not known was possible until the seals came off, both of them looking at this woman with the same precise understanding. "You managed the ration cuts," Zeph said. "You processed the paperwork when Doria's portraits were taken down. You were the one who signed the supply order that moved Cello to the storage crating." She paused. "You wore the dead Luna's ring to the formal delegation." She had seen it on Dorna's hand in the Great Hall, a thing she had not been sure enough of to mention. "No." Dorna shifted. The lean grey wolf was fast, trained and purposeful, mid-air before Zeph had finished exhaling. Zeph shifted. The room was not large enough for the Tideborn wolf. The room became large enough because what the Tideborn wolf carried was not just size but presence, something in the electromagnetic pressure of the air around her that registered in the nervous systems of other wolves below the level of conscious choice. The grey wolf hit that field at full speed and stopped. Not voluntarily, not a decision. Something much older than decision, something written into the bone marrow of what wolves were before they were anything else. The old bloodline remembered the Tideborn. It remembered what they were, what they had been, what they represented. The body responded before the mind had time to object. Dorna's wolf crashed to the floor and did not get up. Zeph did not attack. She stood over Cello's bassinet in the dark, and she let her presence speak, because it turned out that was the language she had. She was still learning how to use it, but it appeared that even untrained, it was sufficient. Dorna shifted back. She was shaking, on her knees on the stone floor, staring up at the tide-born wolf, with the wide, reactive eyes of an animal confronted with something it recognized on a level below reason. "What are you?" she said. Zeph shifted back, wrapped the borrowed shirt around herself, picked up Salo, who was protesting the whole situation at volume. "I'm the wolf they told you was empty," she said. The door burst open. Aldous, blood at his temple, cut across his forearm, eyes that swept the room in under a second, and assembled the scene. Dorna on the floor, Zeph with Salo. The cracked flagstone where the tide-born wolf had stood. "She came for the heir," Zeph said, her voice steady in a way that surprised her. Streth needed the body for documentation. She was willing to do it regardless of whether Salo was living. Aldous looked at Dorna. Dorna was not going to be looking at him anytime soon. She was staring at the middle distance with the fixed gaze of someone whose nervous system was still making sense of what it had encountered. "Take her," Aldous said to the guards behind him. "Find Streth at the border." They found Streth retreating, the distraction having failed, surrounded by Thornwall patrol wolves who had cut off the withdrawal route. He was brought to the great hall in chains while the sky was still the pre-dawn grey that comes before colour. The great hall was full by first light. Every Thornwall wolf who could be present was present. The upper balconies, the side corridors, the floor below the platform, wolves in pack relation standing together in the way packs do when something significant is happening that they need to witness collectively. Zeph stood beside the throne. Aldous had not asked her to. She had walked there herself with Salo in her arms, and he had looked at her when she took her place, and his face had done something unguarded and specific that she was starting to recognize as his version of joy. Streth knelt in chains before the platform. He looked smaller than his authority had always suggested. The architecture of power, she was learning, has very little to do with the person inside it. Beta Strith of Ironhold, Aldous' voice carried to every corner of the hall without effort. "You stand charged with conspiracy in the deliberate neglect of a 3-month-old heir, suppression of the heir's existence following his birth parent's death, falsification of pack administrative records, incursion into Thornwall territory, and assault on this territory's formal protectorate. Ironhold doesn't recognize. Ironhold's recognition is not required. The documentation exists. Your second has given a full account." He paused. "What do you have to say?" Streth's eyes found Zeph. Something moved in them, not remorse, closer to the bewilderment of a man who had miscalculated the significance of something he had dismissed. "She was nobody," he said, "an infirmary aide wolfless. I had no way to know she was. You had no reason to starve an infant regardless of what she was," Aldous said. The words were even, and they were the most devastating thing he had said. You were not required to know anything about her. You were required to not allow a child to die. Streth's mouth closed. The Alpha Gareth has been contacted. He has relinquished formal claim to his heir in exchange for Thornwall's assurance of the child's protection and upbringing. He has also stepped down from the Alpha position effective last night, citing his failure to protect his own son from his own Beta. A pause. Ironhold is currently without an Alpha. The Territorial Council will convene to determine succession. The hall was very quiet. You are sentenced to exile, stripped of rank, stripped of pack bonds, stripped of territorial standing. If you are found within any pack-claimed territory after 30 days, the sentence is death. He looked at the guards. Take him, and find Dorna's formal record to add to the documentation. It was over. The chains clinked on the stone as they led him out. Zeph watched the doors close behind him, and she waited to feel something definitive, vindication maybe, or the specific satisfaction of a story that has ended correctly. What she felt instead was quieter, the particular relief of a chapter that had required so much of her, finally done. That evening Aldous found her on the east-facing balcony. The snow had stopped. The sky was the deep, cold blue of a clear night after weather, and the moon was full, and the forest below was silver and enormous and still. Salo was asleep inside. Marin, Pell's second, who had appointed herself the infant's nutritional guardian and was not accepting objections from anyone including the warden, was monitoring the bassinet with the focused attention of a professional who took sleeping infants seriously. "The pack wants a ceremony," Aldous said. She turned. He was leaning against the railing, close to her. Close but not touching, still honoring the permission structure he had built, still waiting to be invited into her space rather than assuming he was welcome in it. She had been invited since the first night. She was still deciding when to say so outright. "What kind of ceremony?" "The formal kind, where I mark you in front of everyone, and you become the Thornwall Luna." She was quiet for a long time. The moon was reflected in the packed snow on the distant ridge, the light doubling on itself. "I emptied waste basins," she said. "I re-bandaged wounds at 2 in the morning because the healers were sleeping. I was called stillborn in front of every wolf in my age group." She paused. "And now you want me to stand in front of 2,000 people and be their queen?" "Yes, you're not concerned. I'll embarrass you." He looked at her. In the moonlight, his face was stripped of some of its usual architecture, the controlled arrangement of someone accustomed to being observed. "You crossed into enemy territory with no wolf and a broken ankle, and an infant that every person with authority had decided to let die. You stood down a trained combatant without touching her." He paused. "You told me in my own border station that I did not get to decide your fate. A beat. I have never been less worried about anything." She laughed. It came out rough, underused, a sound that had not had much occasion to exist in the last several years. And his head turned immediately, and she saw the look on his face, the way something in the controlled arrangement came open at the seams, the way his eyes changed when he heard it. She understood that he was going to spend a long time listening for that sound, that he had already decided to. "Fine," she said, "but I'm not wearing white. I'll look like I'm haunting the place. Wear whatever you want. That's not a very ceremonial attitude." "Wear whatever you want," he said, "and just be there." The ceremony was 3 days later. At the full moon, the great hall opened to the night through the skylight in the ceiling that let the moonlight fall in a column directly onto the dais. 2,000 wolves filled the hall, and the courtyard and the corridors pressed together. All of them turned toward the front with the focused attention of a pack that understood something significant was happening. Pell sat to the side. Salo was in her lap, which was not a traditional role for a healer at a mating ceremony. But Pell had decided that the infant required continuity of supervision, and no one was going to tell her otherwise. Zeph wore dark green, a dress that someone had found or made. She was not entirely sure, that fit her like it had been made for this body, rather than modified for it. Her hair was loose. The crescent mark on her wrist caught the moonlight and held it. Aldous was at the front of the hall. He was watching her walk toward him, and his face was doing something she had not seen it do before. The careful control, the warden's mask, the arrangement he wore in public, all of it came undone, layer by layer, as she crossed the hall. What was underneath was not what she had expected. It was not power or confidence or the particular ease of a man accustomed to being the most capable person in any room. It was terror. She understood it, crossing the distance. He was afraid she would change her mind, that at the last moment she would recalculate, the way she had been learning to recalculate kindness for 12 years, and find the barb and stop. She reached him. She took his hand. "I'm here," she said. He said the formal words in the old tongue, looking at her the way you look at the first specific light of dawn after a night you were not certain would end. Then he tilted her head, exposing the line of her neck, and she felt his breath first, and then his lips, and then the bite, sharp and specific and nothing like pain, more like a key in a lock, the bond which had been building from the first night, suddenly structural, foundational, part of the architecture of everything she was. She marked him back. Tradition said only the alpha marked. The Tideborn wolves had not always followed that tradition, and she was not interested in starting now. When her teeth broke the skin of his neck, he shuddered, a full-body response he did not attempt to suppress. and his hands tightened on her waist, and the sound that came from his throat was low and involuntary, and 2,000 wolves heard it. The hall erupted. Not sound, exactly. Wolves howling, but from the chest, from the pack core, the resonant acknowledgement of a Luna, a recognition that traveled through the stone and the floor and into her bones. Cello, in Pell's arms, startled at the volume, and then laughed, the confused, delighted laugh of an infant overwhelmed by sensation. Zeph stood on the dais and looked out at 2,000 faces and felt the hollow place she had been carrying for 12 years, the stillborn space where her wolf had been locked away, completely and permanently full. Her wolf pressed against her ribs from inside, content. Aldous' hand was at the small of her back, steady and warm, present without being possessive, there because he wanted to be there, telling the world by proximity that this is where he had chosen to stand. Later, much later, when the hall had cleared and the fires had banked and the snow had begun again outside the windows, she sat on the floor of their rooms with Cello in her lap. The pup was gnawing on a carved wooden ring that Harvin had made, which told her everything she needed to know about the character of the pack she had joined, and examining his own fingers with the intense concentration of an infant discovering that he has them. Aldous sat across from her, back against the bed, formal clothes abandoned, looking like the version of himself she had begun to understand was the real one. Gareth asked about him, Aldous said, about Cello. Wanted to know if he was healthy, if he was happy. What did you say? That he was being raised by a woman who crawled through a drainage tunnel to save him, and that he was the most comprehensively loved infant in 3 territories. A pause. He asked me to tell her, you, that he was grateful. She turned the wooden ring over in her fingers. Is he going to be all right? Aldous considered this with the seriousness she had come to recognize, meant the question was being treated as real rather than rhetorical. He is a man who failed to protect 2 people he loved and is aware of it. The answer to whether he'll be all right is going to take a long time. Cello threw the ring at Aldous' knee. Aldous looked at it, picked it up, held it out. Cello grabbed it with the grip of an infant who intends to be taken seriously. Good aim, Aldous said. Zeph laughed again, the sound easier now, learning itself, finding its shape in the room. She looked at the fire, at Cello's small, intent hands, at Aldous' face in the warm light, the scar softened, the grey eyes half closed and watching her with the specific attention of a man, cataloguing something he intends to keep. I want to go to Ironhold, she said. He tensed. Why? Elder Sen. She had been thinking about this for days, turning it over. She sealed my wolf when I was 4. She also argued in council against the ration cuts every time for 4 years and never won. She told me not to fight my wolf coming through. She paused. I want to understand how someone holds both of those things. How you do something unforgivable and also keep trying to do something right. He looked at her for a long moment. Then I'll come with you. You don't have to. I know. She leaned back against his leg. His hand came to rest on her shoulder. Careful, there because she had made space for it to be there. Cello crawled into the gap between them and fell asleep in the way infants fall asleep, completely, without negotiation, as if the decision had been made by a higher authority. Outside, the snow was falling again in the dark, and the moon was behind the clouds, and the crescent mark on Zeph's wrist caught what light remained and held it. Not brightly, not in a way that announced itself, but steadily, the way a door holds open after someone has passed through it and decided at last to stay.